Deke Dickerson here. Today I've got a fun special treat. A good friend of mine, Jerry Case, is coming over to the house. Now, Jerry Case has lived here in Los Angeles for 40 years. A lot of musicians here in LA know him as an excellent jazz guitar player. But what a lot of people don't know, and what I certainly didn't know until about a year ago, is that Jerry Case actually played with Bob Wills. He was in the last touring version of Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys in the 1960s. Before that, he played with a lot of people in Texas, and he's just an excellent guitar player. So I'm really excited to have him come over to the house. I really wanted him to share some of his own stories. Every time that I'm with him, he busts loose with another story that kind of blows my mind. And I wanted him to play some guitar because he's really, really excellent. So, Jerry Case, he should be here any minute now. All right, I'm sitting here with Jerry Case. We're just getting some video of, I want to hear a little bit about your story because you told me a little bit about this. Now, you grew up in Dallas, right?
Well, actually, East Texas town called Paris.
Okay.
Paris, Texas is where I basically grew up. Starting at, well, we had been in Fort Worth before that, but at age 10, we moved to Paris because my father got a job in Paris. And it turned out to be great for my music because there was a couple of old professionals there. One was named Pee Wee Reed. That was by that time he was a local DJ on the country music station. But he had played bass with Lefty Frizzell in the late 40s, early 50s.
Yeah, I thought I recognized that name from somewhere.
And they decided his partner was Roy Glenn, who was a banjo player from the vaudeville days and stuff like that, but he'd settled down and had a shoe store in that little town. And then my father had been a semi-professional all of his life. He never made a living playing music, but he was back from the days in the 30s where there was live radio shows. And so he and his brother was a band leader named Bill Case, and it was called Bill Case and the Melody Boys. So they would take off from their day jobs and go into the radio station and do a 15 or 30-minute segment, and they had sponsors. It could be a local business of some kind, like a dry cleaners or whatever. So they would have to plug their sponsors during the sponsor, but
right.
they were very successful at that.
And did they do it at like 6 in the morning or something like that?
I think most of the time it was more midday. I think they had to take off from their day jobs at lunchtime and go do their shows mostly, but of course I wasn't even born yet at the time.
And then, if I'm remembering correctly, you and your brother both played music too, right?
Yes, we both. I'm almost 4 years older than he, but he started really young. By age 7, he was performing in public. And
did you play guitar, or what did he play?
He started out playing some guitar, but he switched to piano at a very young age, and he's, to this day, he's never had another job except playing piano.
Wow.
It's been his whole career, and he's been successful at it.
And where does he live these days?
Fort Worth, Texas.
Okay, so he's still in Texas. And you started playing guitar, right? That was your first instrument?
Yes. And around 10 years old, my father showed me the basics. He was more of a mandolin player, but he knew the basic chords on guitar, and he showed me the basics. And I don't mean to be patting myself on the back, but I picked up on it real fast, and we listened. Well, we listened to not my choice, but what I grew up with. My parents listened to Bob Wills and Milton Brown and Jimmy Rogers, that kind of stuff. But he also discovered Chet Atkins and brought a lot of Chet Atkins stuff in. And this was when I was 10 years old or so. And so I really liked that, and I kind of got into playing that style, and I could do it pretty good actually.
Well, Chet was really, I mean, in America, he was kind of the first guitar hero, you know.
Yeah.
First guy you'd hear about, him and Les Paul, maybe.
Yeah, we had some Les Paul records, and our town DJ played quite a bit of Merle Travis, which I think correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Merle kind of before Chet?
He was. Stuff? He had all his hits, you know, and right after World War II in the late '40s, and I'm trying to think when. I don't think Chet made his first record until '48 or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
And of course, you know, Chet always said that he got started because he heard Merle Travis playing on the radio and he couldn't figure out how he was doing it. So.
Yeah, I can believe that. And I've been told that the Everly brothers' father even coached Merle into that style.
Yep. They grew up in the same county in Kentucky where everybody plays like that, even to this day. It's crazy. That's where that style really got perfected.
So, at any rate, these old professionals in this little town decided to start a weekly stage show, very much like poor man's Grand Ole Opry, I guess.
Yeah.
And it became a big hit there in that little town. It was every Saturday, and I became the staff guitar player on it at age 11.
Wow.
For whoever came in they had to audition to get on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they were accepted on the show, we would all meet backstage and an hour or two before the show, and each person would show me what song they were going to do and what key they were going to do it in, that kind of thing. And of course, I wasn't the only staff player. We had a drummer, and Pee Wee played bass most of the time. And I don't think we had a piano at that time, not a regular one at least. But we had a couple of rhythm guitar players. We had the basics to make it happen.
And did you bring in like recording artists to back up?
Occasionally we did. And then we were only 100 miles from Dallas, so some of the Red River Jamboree people started getting on the Big D and took me with them to back them. There was more than one, and so I was on the Big D Jamboree in those years quite a lot too, and doing the warm-up shows for usually Carl Perkins.
Yeah. Well, you had mentioned to me when we first met that you played a lot of rockabilly in those days.
Yeah, I did, because there was a lot of the guys that were on the Jamboree were, of course, Elvis was really big at the time, and Carl Perkins too. And so a lot of the younger guys around Paris were trying to be Elvis wannabes.
Yeah. Do you remember some of those acts that you played with around that time? I mean, probably Sid King and the Five Strings, right? They would have been there at the Big D.
Well, I remember Sid and the Five Strings. I don't recall that I was ever on the Big D at the same time they were, but they were very popular around Dallas at the time.
Did you ever meet Buddy Holly or any of those kind of guys?
Not Buddy. Of course, I knew Tommy also.
Yeah. From the Playboys connection, I would imagine.
But you know, he was with Buddy way back there.
Right.
And but no, I never met Buddy Holly. So with that kind of background behind me, I went into the military right out of high school because I wanted to get. It was either wait and get drafted or join. So I joined to get it out of the way.
And what year was that?
61, I believe.
Yeah.
And then after I got through basic training and my specialty school, I was able to go out and play in the clubs at night at my regular base, and so I was playing about 6 nights a week.
Wow. And where was the base at?
Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Wow.
And this was in the time of the Berlin crisis, and so we got deployed to the Gulf Coast because we thought the country thought we were going to get attacked by Russia through Cuba.
Right.
And so we got deployed to point all of our weapons toward Cuba.
Yeah, yeah.
But it didn't happen, thank goodness.
That was a wild time in American history.
Oh, yeah. So, at any rate, after that, I came back to Paris for a brief time, and there was a little group of us guys that had known each other since childhood that put a little band together, and we were pretty good for basically amateurs. And then the club owner where I was playing at said, "You guys are getting good enough, you ought to go to Lawton, Oklahoma." And at that time, Lawton, Oklahoma was just a hotbed of nightclubs and live music because it was a military town. Fort Sill was next door, and it had as much population as the town had. And at that time, I guess the club owners were paying off law enforcement or whatever, because they could stay open as late as they wanted.
And this was, I remember you mentioning this a while back. It was right on the border of Oklahoma and Texas, wasn't it?
It was 40 miles from the border of Texas. Wichita Falls, Texas, which is 10 miles inside of Texas. And the distance from Lawton to Wichita Falls was about 50 miles.
Yeah.
And so some of the guys I met in Lawton were real pros, and a lot of them had. There was one of the best Western swing bands of all time called the Southern Airs at what was a place called a Southern Club, and it changed personnel. It was there for must have been 20, 30 years, and of course it changed personnel a lot over that period of time, but they always had really good players, including Rusty McDonald. You know that name, don't you?
Yeah.
And he did the singing there a lot. And his great guitar player, Bobby Davis, he's pretty much an unknown, but he was an eccentric guy, but he was a marvelous player. And so he met me, heard me play, and said, "Come over to my house," and gave me his address. He said, "I'll see if I can't get you placed somewhere." So he spent 2 or 3 hours with me in his living room making calls, and he got me placed with little Joe Carson, and that was in Wichita Falls,
right,
50 miles away. And at that time,
and just to interrupt, I mean, little Joe Carson was a regional act at that time, but he got signed to Liberty Records,
yes,
and they really thought he was going to be a big star.
Well, he was charting on Billboard,
right,
and he's the first one I got to go to Las Vegas with, and that was in 1963. See, I was only in the service for 2 years,
right,
and active, and then I had some reserve time to do, but active so by 63, I was playing the Golden Nugget in Vegas with Joe Carson.
Wow.
And Panther Hall in Fort Worth with him. And so that put me in touch with a lot of really great professionals like Wynn Stewart and Roy Nichols and Curly Chalker, and all those guys were in Vegas at the time.
Yeah, I was going to say, was that when Roy Nichols was playing for Wynn Stewart at the,
yes,
the name of that club is right on the tip of my tongue,
well,
the Nashville, Nevada Club.
Well, when I saw Roy, or met Roy and got acquainted with him, there was 2 other clubs beside the Nashville, Nevada, and they were off the strip and only locals knew about them. One was the Lariat and one was the Maverick, and I don't know, one of them was in North Las Vegas and the other one was off the strip. You kind of had to know where it was. And that's when I met Roy Nichols, and Wynn Stewart was the leader. Ralph Mooney was steel, and I think the bass player was named Ray Richardson, I think. And but
Of course, that's the same band that Haggard joined when he got out of prison. You know,
Yeah,
he became
yeah.
the bass player for Wayne Stewart, and that kind of started his career.
Yeah, and I believe they did play the Nashville, Nevada a lot, didn't they? So from that point on, that's when I got to back Willie a few times.
Willie Nelson, we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Was that in Wichita Falls, or?
Yeah, he back in those days, Willie didn't have his own band, and he would go in and work with a house band wherever he could get a booking. And I was with Little Joe in Wichita Falls at the time, and they booked him in to be the headliner, and so our Little Joe's band backed him, and I was a fan of Willie's, and I knew most of his songs, and that impressed Willie that I knew his songs, because he could throw a lot of musicians off by his phrasing and
weird chord progressions in a lot of them. And you know, Willie and Little Joe were both on Liberty at that time.
Yeah.
And that must have been right around the time that Willie was starting to make his first records, right?
Probably was, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, at any rate, I traveled quite a lot with Little Joe, and a lot of times we rode in the same car together, and we would put on those late night AM stations coming out of other parts of the country, and a lot of times we'd hear his songs. I mean, he was really starting to take off.
Yeah.
He was a really good country singer.
All right, so I'm sitting here with the Joe Carson album on Liberty Records, and they really thought he was going to be a huge star, didn't they?
It was really looking promising that he was going to be.
He was a really, really great singer. I know that.
Oh yeah. For that, his style, but he also knew Western swing music, because he kind of grew up in the Lawton, Wichita Falls area,
Right.
and he was part of the Southern Club band at one time. He could play real decent fiddle too, and so we did some Western swing, but he was trying to make his mark in music with really straight country. That was what was the most popular thing at the time.
Yeah. Well, and a few of his honky tonk songs, you know, like Helpless and This Is the Last Song I'm Ever Gonna Sing. I mean, you can go to pretty much any place in Texas tonight and you'll hear those songs played 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
But you told me that you were there the night that he died. I want to hear that story. And this was in 63, 64, something like that?
Early 64, if I'm right. I mean, we could confirm that, but I think it was February of 64.
Yeah.
And I probably didn't tell you this before, and if I could go back and change things, I would do this, but all the other guys in the band were like 10 years older than me, because I was 19 or 20 at the time, and we had been to Vegas and played a couple of times. We'd been to Panther Hall several times, and we were getting paid pretty decent. I don't remember. I couldn't tell you what decent was in those days, but
probably more than we're making now.
Probably. But at any rate, Joe came to us one night and said, he said, I'm pretty sure things are going to get better, but he said, right now I'm kind of in a bind, and I'd like for you guys to take a cut and pay until I can get things reestablished and get back on the track. And so the older guys in the band talked me into quitting too.
Oh, wow.
And so we all gave 2 weeks notice the same night. And this was just right before the accident. And so I reluctantly went along with the older, more seasoned guys and turned in my notice as well. And I didn't feel good about it at the time. I still, if I could go back, I wouldn't do it again.
Yeah.
But I can't. So I can't remember. We had played at least a week of our 2 weeks notice, maybe even a little closer to the 2 weeks. But
And what club was this? Was this the club owned by the Miller brothers?
no, this was owned by Joe's brother J.M. Carson.
Okay.
It was called a Cavalier Club.
Okay.
And for that era, it was a really plush nightclub. It was not a honky tonk. It was, I mean, they had plush sofas and coffee tables, and it was, as Anita O'Day once said, it was an upholstered sewer.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, Wichita Falls, I've been there, and man, it just totally revolves around that military base. So I would assume that every club in town catered to the military people.
Well, this one was quite a ways out on Highway 82 towards Lubbock, and I think we have more regular Wichita Falls citizens more as patrons than we did the military people, because they had tons of places like in downtown Wichita Falls that catered to the soldiers. But whatever, regarding that last night, we played the gig as normal, and Joe and his brother got into some kind of a hassle with each other. I'm not sure what it was about, but it was pretty obvious, even like on our last break, that they were arguing back and forth, and so we went up and did our last set, and Joe did the last song. That was literally the last song that he ever sang.
Yeah, the lyrics of the song is, "This is the last song I'm ever going to sing."
Yeah, and the last time I'll play my guitar. And it literally was, because I left. I'm pretty sure the others guys did too, and they were still at the bar going at each other. And then the next morning we found out that Joe had crashed his car on the highway out of north of Wichita Falls. He missed a curve, and it was an early freeway at the time, and it had a big concrete embankment on the curve, and he didn't make the curve and ran right into the concrete embankment, and it killed him.
Yeah. It's amazing that you were there that night.
Yeah.
Because in among us country music freaks, we always talk about, like, man, that guy was going to be a huge star. I mean, people would know who he is today if that hadn't happened.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think so. So, at any rate, the Miller brothers, who had their name actually wasn't Miller, but they had the Miller Brothers Band and the Miller Brothers Chorale, which was a big dance hall in Wichita Falls.
And they were the most popular act in Wichita Falls, right? They big Western swing band.
Yeah, and but their name was really Gibbs. It was Sam Gibbs and his brother Leon were the main part of the Miller Brothers, whatever you would call it.
Right.
It wasn't really their name, but that's what they chose for whatever reason. But anyway, on a side note of that, Sam Gibbs decided to open a talent booking agency, and it became, for that era, it became really big, and soon his brother Leon joined him, and they had like 40 bands working mostly all across the United States.
Wow.
And a lot of them were military bases, like officers' clubs and such as that, but some regular civilian places as well. And so, and Joe had done some of the Gibbs brothers had done some of the booking for Joe. And later, when I was with Bob Wills, they did some of the bookings for him. They were not exclusive bookers for Joe or Bob Wills, but they did occasional. But they had a ton of groups that they were exclusive agents for. And so after Joe passed away, called the Gibbs agency, and I said, well, you have to have heard that Joe's passed away, and that's who I was working for. And I said, do you have any place you could put me? And they said, could you be in Vegas in 3 days? And I had a car, and I said, well, yeah. And they said, well, I'm going to put you with this group called Judy Kay and the Cadettes. And it was a really nice little group. Judy was a singer. She didn't play an instrument, and had a good piano player and a bass player and drummer, and then they added me.
And where was this at?
Back at the Golden Nugget again.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the Golden Nugget really had a ton of country music back then.
Well, it took 4 bands to do a day's shift, because the first band started at 11 in the morning, and there was the only dark time on the stage was 6 in the morning to 11.
Wow.
So it took 4 bands, and the headliner band always came on, at prime time.
Yeah.
We were opposite Buck Owens there sometimes, and opposite Charlie Walker, and but quite a few times we were opposite Buck. He was really big there at that time.
I know Paycheck worked there, and Hank Thompson worked there.
Oh, Hank worked there back when Merle Travis was with him.
Yeah. Did you ever get to hang out with Merle or Hank Thompson?
With Hank a few times, but never Merle.
Yeah.
When I was with the Bob Wills band, for whatever reason, we would cross paths quite a bit in Texas, where Bob was playing one place and Hank was playing another.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, Hank would almost always try to get together with Bob, and sometimes it would be on our band bus, and us band members were just more like spectators listening to Bob and Hank talk.
I bet, yeah.
But so I wouldn't say I really got to know Hank, but I was around him quite a bit, and I don't have anything bad to say about him. He seemed like a nice enough guy.
Yeah. How long did you do the Vegas gig?
Well, it wasn't only Vegas. That we were with the Gibbs agency, and we would let's say we would do, for the most part, he would put us 2 weeks in each location. Mm-hmm. And so we might do Vegas for 2 weeks, and he was known for making you go long distance for your next gig.
Yeah.
So the next gig might be in Billings, Montana, or Minot, South Dakota.
Yeah.
Or we did a lot of things we did Castle Air Force Base at Merced quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And but we were all over the map with that group. But at least usually it was 2 weeks at a time, even if we had to drive 1,000 miles or 1,500 miles between gigs.
Yeah.
And when I was with Bob Wills, that was one-nighters. That was really brutal. But I was young. It was fun at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that stuff's fun when you're a teenager or in your early 20s.
Yeah, I was in early 20s by the time I was with Bob Wills, and I had some heavy truck driving experience in the military, so I was a natural to be one of the bus drivers.
Oh yeah.
And so.
Well, now before you played with Bob, was there anybody else that you played with in that time period?
Oh, other than Joe Carson was before Bob, mm-hmm. And other than that, it had been mostly with local groups around the hometown of Paris, Texas.
I guess I just meant after Judy Kay.
Oh, I don't even quite remember myself, but I think I got a chance to do what we call sit-down gigs, either in Dallas or Fort Worth or somewhere like that. And I was getting weary of being on the road all the time.
Driving to South Dakota.
Yeah. And so I think I took a job. I know I had this job at one time. I think it's the reason I left the traveling was to join a band in Dallas that included Maurice Anderson and myself, a drummer, and a piano player. And the piano player, myself, and Maurice could all play bass. So we swapped around all the time, and it would be piano, steel, and bass, or guitar, steel, and bass, or whatever. You know, we rotated the bass around all the times.
Well, it's just bass. Come on, let's be realistic.
And
I actually wanted to interrupt you just to ask, like, I mean, obviously, growing up, you heard Western swing and things like that, but when did you really get into jazz music?
by the time I was starting to get influenced by it, even when I was with the country groups like Joe, this Bobby Davis that I mentioned, he played very much like Hank Garland, and I learned a lot from watching him and being around him. And then our steel player on Joe's band was Chuck Caldwell, who's not a name you'd recognize.
I do know the name though.
But and he was a marvelous. But see, there's a lot of elements in Western swing that are very much jazz oriented, and so that's one thing that drew me to Western swing, because I could kind of play a jazzy style in Western swing, and Bob encouraged that. He wanted, when you gave you a solo, he wanted you to just rip it up.
Yeah.
You know,
and I would imagine when you're doing a lot of those long gigs with a Western swing band, they're playing tons of standards, right?
Oh, we used to do quite a few big band songs. It was just with fiddles and steel and guitar instead of horns.
Right.
But you know, we did things like Tuxedo Junction and most of the real familiar big band songs we would do occasionally, but
right.
Especially we might do those before Bob got on, because we would always play usually half hour before Bob would come on. And then once Bob got there, it was pretty much all his standard Western swing stuff.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you how it came that you joined Bob Wills' band.
There was a steel guitar player that was playing in the band, Albert Talley, and I had got to know Albert fairly well from before I was with Bob, when I was not on the road with somebody, I would always be back in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. That's where my mother and brother lived. And so when I was off the road, whether it would be for a week or whatever, I would go around to the different clubs and sit in usually, and because I'd already been with Joe Carson and I'd already been out on the road a lot. And so I got to sitting in with the band that Albert Talley was playing in, and then I went back out on the road, I guess, and during that interim, Albert had joined the Texas Playboys, and they had a fiddle player named Merle David that played fiddle, but he also doubled on guitar, and he was tired of the road and wanted to get off, so they were in the market for somebody to replace Merle David. So Albert highly recommended me and got me my audition with the band.
And how did you do that audition?
We were let me think. I think we were playing with a different band in a nightclub in Dallas, and he had Bob himself didn't show up, but he had some of the other members of the Texas Playboys come in and listen to me, and so between Albert's recommendation and some of the other guys listening to me to play with the band that Albert was, see, at that time, we would, if we were not on the road, we'd play local gigs.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what Albert was doing at that time. He was with the Texas Playboys, but I believe he was off for a night or two and playing a local Dallas gig. And so that's when he had me come in and sit in with that band, and then had some of the Playboys band come in and listen to me and meet me and stuff. And so it just after that night, they said, "You sound good to me. We'll recommend you to Bob or whatever." And so I never met Bob till I was on the stage with him.
Wow, that's amazing. And what year did you join? 65 or something like that?
It's really hazy for me to remember. It was about 65.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was 65.
And who else was in the band at that time? Was it Leon Rausch?
Leon Rausch was the road manager, really. By then, Bob had a limo and a driver, and the only time he would ride the bus with us was if it was a real short haul, like an hour or something like that. He might ride the bus with us, but if it was clear cross country, which a lot of our things were, he had like a new Lincoln limo and a chauffeur. And
so he was still making good money even at that time.
Yeah, it was decent money for the time. And so anyway, Leon Rausch was the band manager. He's the one that was responsible for telling us what time the bus would leave and trying to keep us all herded together. And but the fiddles were Jimmy Belkin and Johnny Manson, who had been on the Ozark Jubilee with Red Foley for that was the fiddles. Albert was on steel guitar at first. He left after a while, and that road life was. Most of these guys were married, and so that road life was tough. And a lot of the guys would, after 6 months or whatever, they'd bail out.
Right.
And see, on bass, there was a fellow named Charlie Meeks, who had been with the Western Starlighters, which was not a famous band, but it was a good band, a real good band. And let's see.
Was Tag Lambert in the band at that time?
No, I got to meet and hang around Tag quite a bit, but I never was on the band at the same time that he was. He was a great player.
Yeah. And then you recorded that Cap album with Bob, right? When you went to Nashville. And I was looking at that today. It was kind of 3 or 4 of Bob's guys, and then some Nashville studio guys.
They added some, for whatever reason, they didn't think our bass player was up to it. So Bob Moore, who was a Nashville,
he played on everything,
first call player, played bass, and Pig Robbins played piano, and they had some arranger write some horn parts, and we had maybe 3 horns or something like that. That was not part of our touring band,
right?
But that they just added it to whatever the word would be, to relish, or I don't know what the proper word would be.
Well, it's funny when you listen to records like that from around that time, because they're trying to figure out how to sell it to the current
public,
the current market of 1966 or 1967, and it's music from the 30s and 40s, so they had all kinds of ideas about that. But that's amazing that you actually recorded with Bob, and that was really the last touring lineup of the Texas Playboys, wasn't it?
It pretty much. I finally left after getting worn out from the road, and I think it went on for maybe a few more months. They replaced me. I'm pretty sure the guy was named Charlie Carpenter that replaced me, and I think they went on a few more months, and then Bob's health was not great even at that time, and I think after I don't really know exactly, but I think after I left, the band only toured another just a few months, I think, and then the whole thing.
Well, then he got sick and went in the hospital.
Yeah.
And then after that, it was just, I don't think he ever toured again. It was just kind of scattered appearances here and there and a few more recording sessions.
Yeah, and that famous one he did with Merle Haggard, the
He was just there the
Playboys for
first
the
day.
last
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
You know, he was in a wheelchair, and I think he had a stroke right in the middle of the session or something.
I think he was there the first day and then had a stroke, and then they finished the session without him being there.
So, but it was quite an experience for a young guy.
And do you know offhand, I mean, how many original Texas Playboys are left? There can't be too many.
Not too many. They tried to, when I was, a few years ago, I was going to Texas 3 or 4 times a year to do festivals, and they were trying to get as many of us together as they could, and at the time, Herb Remington was still alive.
Yeah, and he passed in
He's gone now.
2019 or 18, something like that.
And then Louise Rowe, she's still alive, but she's in really bad health now.
Yeah.
But she was still able to play at that time when I was doing the festivals. And so this promoter that put the ones on in South Texas, Al Dressen, tried to get as many of us originals as we could, but he had great players that knew that style to fill in and take the places of the ones were not there.
Yeah. And even, the current version of the Texas Playboys has a bunch of great players.
The Jason Roberts version, that's a wonderful band. I've seen them in person, and it's really pretty close to as authentic as you could get.
Yeah. But, I've been into this music for close to 30 years, and I've met quite a few of those guys. We got to play with Herb Remington. I'm trying to think of who else we met. Johnny Gimbel, you always used to see him playing around Texas and stuff like that. But now here in 2023, it's just not very many of y'all left.
No.
And of course, I was blown away when somebody said, there's a Texas Playboy that lives here in the San Fernando Valley. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? That can't be possible. And then we found out that we're practically neighbors.
Yeah, that was really an odd coincidence, but it's been very nice to get to meet you and do some playing together and talking together. There's not many people I can talk about those things,
Well, there you go. I love talking about it too. Before we get off the subject of Bob Wills, did you have much personal interaction with him at all when you were touring with him?
Not a great deal, but of course he got used to seeing me on the bandstand every night, and occasionally when he'd ride the bus with us, I got to have a little bit of one-on-one with him and like that. But as far as getting to really, really know him, I'd be lying if I said I really did get to know him.
His health was pretty bad at that time, I know.
He was already not doing real well,
Yeah.
But his spirits were usually good and upbeat, and he could sure still lead the band.
Yeah, and y'all were still doing a pretty demanding touring schedule at that time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, playing a ton and driving a bunch, and
we were all over the place. We did a lot in Texas, of course, like San Antonio, Austin, Houston, and there's a small town called Navasota that we played out a lot. But also his name was still big out here, especially in the San Joaquin Valley.
right.
Fresno, we would play and just pack the house.
Did you ever play at the Fresno Barn? Was it still going when you?
I think that was probably the place that we
Great
played.
big place, kind of on the outskirts of town.
I think that's the place we played.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when we'd be here in LA, we would play the Palomino.
Yeah.
And there was some big ballroom in Anaheim that we used to play too.
Like Harmony Park, or there was another one down there too. But
boy, it's been so long, I probably wouldn't even
yeah,
remember. But and we played Portland one time. I mean, yeah, we were all over the
was that the 97th Street Corral in Portland, probably?
No, this was a big show. We played at the convention center.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know if I told you that story or not, but this promoter had booked. Oh, there was Marty Robbins was on it, Skeeter Davis, Merle Travis too.
Yeah.
In fact, that's the one time I got to play with Merle.
Oh, wow.
But I played bass for him.
Right.
Because he was there by himself, and that's one thing they used to do a lot was when acts would come in alone, they would take members, usually out of the Bob Wills band, to fill in their vacant positions.
Right.
And so back at that time I was pretty proficient on bass too. So Merle needed a bass and drums, and so our drummer from the Wills band and myself backed Merle on this show.
That's very cool.
And but what I'm getting around to, the show started at 7 at night, and each act only had like 15 minutes, and it went till midnight. So that's how many. And they were Lefty Frizzell was there, Skeeter Davis was there. I mean, it was like a who's who of country music.
Yeah.
So our next night was to be in Eugene, Oregon, which was only, 90 miles away, 100 miles, something like that.
Yeah.
So we were riding down to Eugene in the bus, and somebody said, "Leon, where are we playing in Eugene?" He said, "Well, I don't know, but we'll just get a paper when we get there and see where the big show is."
And that's some pre-internet tour planning right there.
So we get to Eugene and we get a paper. We didn't see anything in the paper about it, and so there was this one main drag in Eugene. So we're driving up and down it in the bus, and we started meeting all these other band buses driving up and down the main drag. So we finally found a place where a bunch of us could pull in together. It turned out that promoter had taken the proceeds from that night in Portland and flew to Brazil.
Oh, man. So the show never happened.
In Eugene, it didn't. And I guess nobody got paid for the Portland one.
Yeah.
So Leon.
That's why they call it show business.
Yeah. So Leon got on the phone with the Gibbs agency, which, like I told you earlier, was not our exclusive agent, but they did book us some, and so Leon got on the phone with them and said, "Look, we're up here in Oregon and we're stranded and we need to get back to Texas. Can you find us some gigs on the way back?"
Yeah.
And sure enough, they did.
Wow.
I remember one for sure was in some town in Arizona. It wasn't Tucson, but it was pretty close to Tucson, and it just they found us a handful of gigs because from Oregon to Fort Worth, Texas is about 3 days of driving.
Yeah. And even though gas was cheap back then, that was still a lot of money.
Yeah, and our bus probably got 5 miles a gallon, maybe.
Yeah. So when you left the band, did you ever see Bob again?
Never did. No. I kept Leon and I were in touch right up to the time he passed.
Yeah. And I know that Bob passed on the Texas Playboys name to him, right? That was the story.
I think he tried to keep it going for a while, but it eventually just fizzled out.
Yeah.
But now this Jason Roberts has it going again, and they're doing a marvelous job.
You want to do an intro?
No, just go ahead and get in it however you want to. I'll try to do some Eldon style behind you.
All right, great. Roly-poly, eating corn and taters, hungry every minute of the day. Roly-poly, gnawing on a biscuit, it takes lots of work to run and play. He can eat an apple pie, never even bat an eye. He likes everything from soup to hay. Roly-poly, daddy's little fatty, bet he's gonna be a man someday. Roly-poly, scrambled eggs for breakfast, bread and jelly 20 times a day. Roly-poly, he eats a hearty dinner, takes a lot of strength to run and play. He's up at dawn to do the chores, he runs both ways through all the stores. He works up an appetite that way. Roly-poly, daddy's little fatty, bet he's gonna be a man someday. Do it one more time. I was gonna have you take it out. Roly-poly, daddy's little fatty, bet he's gonna be a man someday.
All right.
I wanted you to tell me about this guitar because probably the average person who's going to see this video just thinks it's a guitar, but man, you start looking at it a little close. It's a Epiphone that started out life as a 6-string
Exactly. Yeah.
and no cutaway. I'm guessing, right?
Right. No,
And,
you can see where it was added, but it's done very nicely.
Yeah. But it's a very unique guitar because you converted it to a 7-string.
Well, I bought it already converted.
Okay.
I bought it without even seeing it or touching it. I bought it from a studio player in New York City,
Yep.
and I found it through the Musicians Union International paper.
And were you into 7-string at that time?
I had already, well, Marty Sanderson at his shop had converted a Fender Strat to 7/4.
Oh, wow.
In fact, I was playing a Fender Strat 7 when I was with Bob.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
I know there's that one photo of you where you're playing a Strat. Is that the one?
it probably is, yeah. But I was never really as happy with the sound of it. And I know some other people have come along and know how to make a Strat or Fender guitar sound really good, but I never could. See, I'm being a chord-oriented player. I like to hear all the inner voices of a chord distinctly, and I could never. See, you can hear every note individually. It's pretty much the same volume, and I could never get that of a Fender. So I knew I wanted a hollow body, and the fellow I mentioned earlier, Albert Talley, that I had played beside on Bob's band, saw the ad in the Musicians Union paper first, and he called me. We were not working together by that time, but he called me and said, "Jerry, I saw a 7-string Epiphone advertised." He said, "It's in New York City," and it was very reasonable at the time. Of course, I'm talking. This was 1969.
Right.
I
And
think
the
it
arch
was,
tops like that weren't very popular at that time.
No.
It was in the era of hard rock and Jimi
Yeah.
Hendrix and all that.
Exactly. And so, so I contacted this fella, and it turns out he was a studio player in New York, and he sold this because he got himself a custom guitar made by one of the famous makers up there, either D'Angelico or D'Acquisto. One of them.
Well, I was going to ask you how this thing wound up with a D'Angelico tailpiece on it.
Well, that's a mystery to me too, because it was on there when it arrived to me, shipped from New York.
Yeah.
This was already on it. The only thing I've changed really is the pick guard. The old one, the one that came with it was coming apart, and
Those old Epiphone guards do that. This is a reproduction one I had made.
oh, is it?
Yeah.
And so, and then I put the de-arming on it, and it already had this hole in it here, so I think earlier somebody had some kind of an electric pickup on it, so I just routed the wire out of the de-arming down into this conventional hole, and
So you've been playing the snot out of this thing since 1969.
I played, for many years, I played 7 nights a week.
Wow.
After my traveling days, I joined this group. It was basically a hotel lounge group in the Dallas. We played all the Dallas-Fort Worth area and all parts in between. But we were a really hot group at that time, and we could cover anything from. A lot of times we played in what used to be popular supper clubs. And we would play like old standards while the people were eating. And we were keeping up with the top 40 of that era, which was like Three Dog Night and
Right.
and Creedence Clearwater and all. And so we could do those kind of things too when the people got finished where they're eating. We wanted to get a little rowdy.
Right.
And then as the night wore on, usually our last set we'd go into more of a jazzy type thing.
Right.
So it was a really fun gig and paid me very well for many, many years.
And you got to stay in one place, right? You didn't
Yeah.
have to get on a bus.
Exactly. And but I played this guitar through all of that and through all the different styles. I used to even do a control feedback thing with it.
Oh yeah, I bet.
And that went over good with some of those rock tunes of that era.
Yep. And that's my earliest memory, because I was a young kid in the 70s, but I just remember so many of those kind of supper clubs and places like the Roadway Inns and all those kind of places. They were sort of the last places that had live music 7 nights a week.
Yeah.
There was a lot of work back in those days at those kind of places.
Oh, yeah. We used to never worry about being out of work. We were the band leader of that group would. At first, everything was union contracted.
Right.
And we would usually in the middle of a summer, we would have not only the rest of that year booked, but the entire next year already contracted and signed.
I need to sign up with that agency.
But those are long gone days.
I know. And I'm assuming that carried over into the 80s?
The early 80s is, our last gigs together was like in 85. And that's when I moved to California to study.
Yeah.
And, but
What brought you to California?
Well, I had been in and out of California through my traveling all my life, and I, for whatever reason, I really liked it out here.
Yeah, same with me. When I toured out here, I said, "Man, how long until I can move out here?"
And then, I wasn't after that gig, and I wasn't setting the world on fire back in that area because see, our music, even with that group, it was going out of the style because we did stay fairly current right up through the disco era.
Yeah.
But after that, we were all getting tired and kind of burned out of playing so long and so much, and it just kind of fell apart.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have a gig, and so I decided, well, if I'm gonna be starving to death, I might as well starve to death out here.
Yeah. And did you play music when you got out here? Or did you do something else?
I joined the union first thing when I got here, and 2 weeks after my late wife was with me at the time, and 2 weeks after we got our first little apartment in Burbank, I was out with my tux on playing gigs. At that time, there was a lot of casuals going on here, and there some of those casual leaders had 8 and 10 bands working on, especially on weekends, and so I got in with some of that and rode that out. The casual business kind of really fizzled out in the late 80s, early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got into playing, like I played at Casey's out in Canoga Park for almost 30 years on Saturday nights. And then I got involved with some of did country club gigs, and there was a hot spot in West LA called Bandera at one time that used piano, guitar, and bass for background music. And I was fortunate enough to get that gig, and it lasted quite a few years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like several nights. It wasn't 6 nights a week, but it was like 4 nights a week.
And was Bandera a country place or no?
No, it was a real trendy restaurant, and we basically played background jazz.
Yeah.
The people didn't pay much attention to us. We were off in a corner, kind of. And
yeah. Which reminds me, before we get too further along, I'd love to hear you play, one of your specialties, like a chord melody thing on that 7-string.
They can't take that away from me. This was inspired by me hearing Georgia and Elps play it,
Did you ever see him play when he was out here?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, he used to play at that place Chadney's in Burbank, but I never got down there to see him.
Yeah, I got to see him half a dozen times about.
Yeah.
And I haven't even attempted this song in quite a few years, so but maybe it will demonstrate the 7-string quite a bit.
watching you play, I'm remembering that low string is tuned to an E flat?
B flat.
Oh, B flat, okay. So other than that, it's standard
Standard
six
tuning
strings.
from that standard tuning with a low B flat. And I know it doesn't make sense musically.
Well, how did you come to that? Because that's not what George Van Epps used, is it?
No, most 7-string players either use it as a B or an A.
Mm-hmm.
When I first put the first 7-string on, I did use it as a B, and but by then I was not playing in so many country settings, and the B flat comes in real handy as a pedal tone when you're in the key of E flat,
Right.
or a root if you're in the key of B flat. And so at home one day I was just playing around with the tunings, and I tuned it down to the B flat and started to experiment with it, and I liked it, and so
Yeah.
I just left it there.
You know anybody else that uses a 7-string with a low B flat?
I do not.
Wow. I mean, I love that sort of thing. I mean, that's you, man. That's your unique thing.
Okay, I'll try them for lonesome I could cry.
Okay. Very nice.
A little rough in places.
But you know, I've thought this on more than one occasion when I watch you play, because you know Willie Nelson does a lot of the same sort of like sliding chords and throwing in jazz chords on country songs.
Yeah.
Was that something that was a common thing in Texas at that time, like the Western swing influence?
Yes, absolutely. That's where I got my start in doing that kind of thing. Even with Little Joe's band, we did a lot of, we called them passing changes, but the jazzers usually call them more like substitutions, but it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah. And it's neat for me to hear a song that's basically a 3-chord song get turned into like a 75-chord song with all those jazz substitutions and things like that getting thrown in there.
Yeah, it's really different than playing it straight.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be just.
Yeah.
Which is good too. That's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and back in those days, did you find some of the country audiences didn't like the jazz stuff getting thrown in there?
Sometimes, yeah.
I'm just remembering when I saw Ray Price at the Crystal Palace up in Bakersfield before he passed, and the opening set was his band playing all jazz songs.
Oh,
And man, like by the time they were done, they were like booing them.
Oh,
They were
really?
like, "Bring on Ray Price!" They like were done with the jazz. They wanted to hear some country, and then of course he wound up playing all these jazz songs in his set. But it always makes me wonder, like, because you were playing some pretty rough redneck joints back then, you know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we. I'll tell you about a New Year's Eve with Joe Carson one time. This probably would have been the New Year's Eve before He passed away in February, or it might have been a year before that. I don't remember exactly, but we got booked into the. See, we were a house band at the Cavalier Club in Wichita Falls, but since it was his brother's club, when we got a road gig, it was just an agreement that they had. They would bring in a local band to take our place while we were on the road. So we had the freedom to go out and be on the road anytime we got a gig. Or of course, I didn't have anything to do with getting the gigs. It was just I was told through the agents or Joe or whatever, we're going to be. So this particular New Year's Eve was in a town called Brownwood, Texas.
Yeah.
And and it was a typical Texas dance hall, rectangular shaped, with wooden tables and chairs all the way around the perimeter, a big hardwood dance floor right in the middle, red and white checkered tablecloths.
Oh yeah.
A bar on one end, and the bandstand was total opposite on the other end. Thank goodness we had a back door that we could bring our instruments in and out of, because we wound up needing it. Well, this crowd was mostly oil field workers.
Yeah.
And their ladies. Well, about a little bit before midnight, to this day I have no idea what triggered it, but the fight broke out, and everybody in there, the gals and the guys, were fighting. The gals were pulling hair, and the guys were fighting and busting chairs, and
just like in the movies, huh?
when we, honest to goodness, we after it was obvious it was out of control, we started taking our stuff out the back door.
Yeah.
Because we had our whatever we were traveling in at the time. I think it was a van at that time. We started loading our stuff in because there was nothing we could do. The fight was out of control. But after it was, when we were putting our final stuff in the vehicle to get away from there, we looked in and it was just debris. There was nothing left standing of tables and chairs. Wow. It was just total debris.
Wow.
And I'm pretty sure, I think the ambulance things had to come and take 2 or 3 people away. And
wow.
It was, I played some rough joints.
And what town did you say that was in?
Brownwood, Texas.
Oh yeah, wow. Did you ever go back?
No, I don't believe I ever did. One night, when I was with the band I joined after the GDK band, they put us all over the place too, the Gibbs agency, but they put us in some little town in Arizona one night for a Saturday night, and it was in the high school gymnasium, and we had a really big crowd, and the crowd just loved us. And so somebody that was kind of in charge of the events said, what are you all doing tomorrow night, which would be a Sunday night? I said, well, we have the night off. We're opening Monday night in Tucson, but we have tomorrow night off. He said, so this person who was kind of the spokesperson of the town or whatever said, well, why don't you stay overnight and play tomorrow night in our little bar over here? And it was a tiny little bar. And so it sounded good to us, so they put us up somewhere, some little motel or something, and so we're playing in there the next night, and it's a tiny little room. It's probably not much bigger than this little area we're sitting in here now, and it was just crowded with people, and they were just setting us up drinks one after another.
Yeah.
And we were partaking of them, and it was a fun night, but it was really crazy. And about probably a little before we were gonna close, they opened the front door, and this guy rode in on a horse.
A tiny little place.
Here's this horse in a room this size with
man.
people everywhere, so the people all had to just get scrunched up in little bunches, and so the horse would have room.
That's funny.
So we got off, and started loading up, and the horse was tied up outside. The horse was only in there maybe 5 minutes, you know, and then they took it out and tied it up outside. And so here I am drunk and see that horse, and I think, well, there's nothing to do but ride that horse.
Oh man!
And I'm not a horseman, but I mean I had a little experience, and it was bareback.
Oh wow!
And so I couldn't. I tried to get on it and couldn't. So somebody led it over. We had a trailer at the time, and somebody led it over to the trailer, and I was stepped up on the fender of the trailer, then was able to get up on it.
That's funny.
And thank goodness it was a gentle horse, because I rode it around the parking lot there, and it just did exactly what I wanted it to do.
That's funny.
And I was wearing a kind of a dark suit, and the next day when I looked at my suit, it had horsehair embedded in it everywhere. I just had to throw it away.
That's too funny. Well, that's actually something you and I have in common, because I actually rode a horse into the Redwood Bar in downtown LA.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
I played there one time.
Yeah, so you've been down there, you know, it's downtown LA, and there's this giant parking lot next to it. And I was playing there on a Sunday afternoon, and I showed up in the parking lot, and there was this buddy of mine there with a woman who had a horse trailer, and she must have had 10 horses in this horse trailer.
Oh, wow.
And I'm talking to him, and then, you know, finally he gets this look on his face. He goes, "You want to ride the horse into the bar?" And I said, "Yeah, let me just, you know, make sure this is cool first." And so I went in the bar, and there was only about 9 or 10 people in there. I mean, it was a Sunday afternoon show, so it wasn't crowded. And so I got up on this horse. It had a saddle. I wasn't riding bareback like you. And made my grand entrance on the horse, and then
Oh my God!
I was probably on the horse less than 45 seconds, but it was pretty funny. And I, to my best of my knowledge, I don't think anybody else has ever rode a horse into the Redwood.
I bet not.
Especially, I mean, you know, your gig was in Texas somewhere, right?
Well, it was Arizona.
Arizona, yeah. But yeah, especially in downtown
of course,
LA.
they were all cowboys there, you know.
Yeah.
I've never been able to identify where that was. It was a little, almost just like a crossroads that had a school and the gymnasium where we played our first night in this little bar. But I mean, it was just almost nothing there, but the surrounding ranchers and stuff, I guess, is what came in and filled the place up.
Right.
I guess I better knock off pretty soon.
You want to do one more?
Okay, sure.
My window faces the south. I'm almost halfway to heaven. Snow is falling, still I can see those fields of cotton calling to me. My window faces the south, and though I am far from the Swanee, I'm never frowning or down in the mouth. My window faces the south. should have worked on our endings before we got together.
Oh, that's okay. They're never the same.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for getting together.
Oh, my pleasure.